Hello again, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Spencer, and welcome to another HLIFX 002 demo video where we show off a new lighting and control setup using our 002 circuit board. And in this video, kind of excited to show you this one because it is for the, drumroll please, USS Grissom. Yes, the Oberth class Federation Starship's science vessel, basically, as it was premiered in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. The USS Grissom. For most of us, we know that by this point that Round 2 will very soon be releasing, if they haven't already by the time you're watching this video, a 1/350th USS Grissom. It's going to be, we think, a pretty nice little bit of kit. And we figured, you know what? Why wait until the kit comes out and everybody else comes out with a lighting solution when we can do it right now? Yes, we can do it right now. We can produce a lighting and control board for the Grissom. But wait, there's more to it than that. Um, we also have, in our design considerations, made the board also a perfectly feasible solution for lighting the NX 2000 variant of the USS Excelsior, as it also appeared in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. Another potential use of this board is as a very, very simple lighting solution for a Star Trek III battle-damaged Enterprise refit. And I'll go into detail of all that a little later during the actual demo portion. But we're marketing it as a USS Grissom board, but understand that it's a perfect solution for an NX2000 and another possible solution for simple lighting in a battle-damaged refit. So what I want to do first is just give you a basic overview of the board. As you can see here, as is the case with most of the other demos, we have our 5 control pins labeled A through E. The Grissom circuit uses pins A through D. Pin E is unused, so you just leave it disconnected. We have our 3 power pins, plus 5 volts. That's just a constant 5-volt output. You leave it alone as well. It's not used in the Grissom. And we have our 2 power pins, VN and ground. This is where you connect your DC power supply. VN for your positive, ground for your negative, or the ground of your circuit. The board is tolerant for both 9-volt and 12-volt DC. You do not go above 12 volts. That will void your warranty. Do so only at your own risk. We have had questions about the board being driven at lower voltages. I will say that it is possible, but we make no guarantees about the long-term performance, reliability, or behavior of the board. If you take the voltage too low, it will behave intermittently, and it may not function at all. And that is highly dependent on a lot of different things, not just on the board, but also of the specifics of your circuit and your situation. So the board is optimized to work at 9 and 12 volts. Those are the voltages we recommend. Go beyond those. Again, that's something you do of your own volition. The board itself is about 1 inch by 3/4 of an inch in size. You can see that kind of based on the grid of my cutting mat there on screen. We do try to keep the vertical profile of the board fairly low. On the other side are the components. We understand that vertical space can be a bit of a premium inside model kits and bases. We do personally recommend that you put your boards inside of your bases so that if something were to go wrong, something were to need replacing or repair, it would be easier to get to. You wouldn't have to break your model open. We do put our labelings on the underside of the board, as you see here, just because it saves us some space. And it's better to solder your wires from the underside of the board because it is a little bit easier on the thermals of the board, and you're less likely to damage a component with the tip of your soldering iron. But that's a basic look at FX002. So what I'll do now is jump over to the breadboard, set up the demo, and show you what the effects look like. I'll be right back. And I now have the breadboard demo set up here to show you what the effects look like. What I've done here is taken the 002 board and just jumpered it over to the breadboard itself. I actually use this for a lot of my prototyping and design and conceptual work for the HLIFX boards. But what I've done is for each channel A, B, and C, I've just put a singular LED just to give you a very simple way to see the effects that you'll be getting if you decide to buy the board. Channel D is a control pin that will control the impulse engine effect, which I'll show you here very shortly. But what I'm going to do is provide power to the board. I'm using my 9-volt DC wall wart, and when I turn the board on, it immediately begins to run. Pay no mind to this LED. That's just that just lets me know that the breadboard's getting power. These are just extra demo circuits that are not being used right now. But as you can see on channel A, we have a navigation blinker. Channel B, we have a strobe. And channel C, we have an impulse engine effect. Now, before I go into these into detail, let me talk a little bit about the Grissom. If you go and you watch Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, which is the template that we are using for the Grissom, it's interesting in that the Oberth class is remarkably simple in its lighting. All you really have are strobes. You have formation lights, your reds and greens, your navigations, as I tend to call them. But on the Grissom, they don't blink. You have window lighting, which is obviously static. And you have an impulse engine light, but it too is static. The only thing that is actually changing that's dynamic are the strobes. So we could have made an astonishingly simple circuit, given you just strobes and been done with it. But we know that some folks out there are going to want to have formation light blinkers. They're reds and greens. We know they're going to want them to blink. We know that some folks are going to want an impulse engine effect, whether it be a pulse or a flicker, not just, a bulb connected to power and then maybe turn it off with a switch, right? You can do that without a circuit board, but there are going to be folks who want something dynamic for the impulse engines. So we've provided that here as well. Now, the strobes, that's the important one. We went and we looked at the entire footage of the Grissom, shot by shot, frame by frame, to get the timing for the strobes as accurate as possible. So know that if you buy this Grissom board, you are getting accurate strobes. Of course, that then brings us to the navigation blinkers. These are optional in the Grissom. So what do we use as a reference? Well, we looked at the other two Federation ships that show up in the Search for Spock, the Enterprise Refit, the battle-damaged Refit, and the NX 2000 Excelsior, the prototype variant, if you will. And both of those ships in Star Trek III had blinking strobes and blinking formation lights. The rates change from one film to another, but amazingly enough, in Star Trek III, all the blinking rates across all three ships are consistent. So this navigation blinking rate is based off of the NX 2000 and the Star Trek III Enterprise Refit. So it's a natural choice to use as an optional nav for the Grissom. If in some other parallel universe where the Grissom Studio model would have had formation blinkers, pretty good bet this is what that would have been. Now, you can hook up multiple LEDs to each of these channels, so you can get strobes and navs everywhere you need them. The instructions obviously go into detail on how to do that. And that finally brings us to the impulse engine. Right now, what you're seeing is a pulsation effect. It's a ramp up and down in overall brightness with little pulsations on top of it. This is a very similar kind of effect to what we did with the Klingon Bird of Prey engine effect on our Bird of Prey control board. But we've made it a little bit more exaggerated here. Again, there's a pretty good chance you're going to have one or at most two LEDs in the Grissom's impulse engine. probably 1 if you really want to stick mainly to Canon. So it helps to exaggerate that effect a little bit to make it a bit more visible. But that's the pulsation. But we also have included an optional flickering effect. How do you get that? You get that through channel D. If you leave channel D alone, disconnected, nothing attached to it, by default, when the board powers up, you get this pulsation. If, however, you jumper a wire from channel D to ground, that is, you solder a wire from point D at one end and connect the other end to the ground of your circuit, you will get a flicker. Now, how I've set this up is with a toggle switch. Open like this, channel D is connected to nothing. It's just disconnected. If I close the switch, channel D is now jumpered to ground. And if I turn power back on so that the board registers the change, we now have a pseudo-random flicker. Now, the camera's going to smooth out the jumps a little bit, make it look more like random rapid pulses, but believe me, there's a random or pseudo-random flicker there happening. We wanted this to be a little bit, or I should say not quite as fast or as subtle as our simple Falcon engine effect, because we didn't want it to look like a thruster. But we also didn't want it to be too slow and too dramatic, because then at that point, it's more just like a T-candle, a flickering LED. We wanted something kind of in between. Not too fast, not too slow, but also not too extreme or subtle in its brightness changes. And so this is the flickering effect. So if channel D is jumper to ground, this is what you'll get for the impulse engines. Again, if I disconnect channel D to anything, leave it disconnected, we have our pulsation. If I connect channel D to ground, we have our flicker. And if you really wanted to, you could use a toggle switch yourself, a toggle switch or a push button latching switch, any inline switch that breaks the connection, you could use. You could switch between having pin D disconnected or pin D jumper to ground. Just understand that if you do that, the board does have to be turned off and turned back on to register the change. If I try to change it while the board is running, you get nothing. There's no change. The board has to be basically repowered in order for the change to take effect. So if you want to be able to select between the two modes, you can. You just have to use some kind of inline switch. And that's the Grissom circuit. Now what about the NX2000? I mentioned that earlier in the video. If you look at the Excelsior Studio model, what is on it in terms of effects? Well, you've got blinking navigation or formation lights, like this one. You've got blinking strobes, like this one. You also have impulse engines. You don't really see them in Star Trek 3, but you do see them in Star Trek 6. We've got impulse engines here. What else is on the Excelsior Studio model, particularly the Star Trek 3 version? You've got a deflector, but it's static. And you've got window lighting, and it's static. But that's it. The Excelsior, at least in terms of the Studio model, did not have warp nacelles that lit. On later digital versions of the ship, particularly in Deep Space Nine and parts of the flashback episode of Voyager, the warp nacelles did light. But on the actual studio model, until you get to the Enterprise B overhaul, the actual studio model of the Excelsior did not have lit warp engines, lit warp chillers, or anything like that. I know the Excelsior kit has clear parts for it, but if you want to build an accurate version of the NX or NCC 2000, those warp engines have no lights in them. The strobes are timed to match the Excelsior because it's all consistent in Star Trek 3. The navigation blinkers are also matched for the same reason. And you have an optional impulse engine. The other good thing about it is that recently that Round 2 re-released the Excelsior kit with newer box art. They did it back in 2016, I believe, at the 50th anniversary, but they recently have reboxed it again, and it comes with optional parts for the NCC or NX variant. So the kit's still easy to find. It's still being made by Round 2, I believe. It's still relatively inexpensive to get a hold of. So if you want to grab one of those and build an NX variant, this circuit would actually be perfect for it. As for the Enterprise Refit, you could use this circuit. Understand you're not going to get all the bells and whistles of a refit circuit, right? You're not going to get a deflector control or impulse crystal control or anything like that. But you will get navs and strobes that are timed for Star Trek 3, and you will get an optional impulse engine effect. So if you want to go out and buy, say, the 1000 scale kit that Round 2 also recently has re-released with the Wrath of Khan battle damage decals included, right? If you want to make a Star Trek 3 battle damaged 1000 scale Enterprise, this actually would also be not a bad circuit to use. We are marketing it, of course, as a Grissom board, but it's a perfectly good choice for an NX 2000 variant and a good choice, we think, for simple battle damaged refit lighting. And that is the USS Grissom HLIFX 002 lighting and control board. We're excited about this circuit. We think a lot of people will be interested in it. We think a lot of people hopefully will buy it and put it into their Grissom builds. We think the Grissom's going to be one of those big items for a lot of sci-fi modelers. So if you're interested in this board, hopefully very soon, if not already, it should be up on the HobbyLink International online shop at shop.hobbylinkinternational.com. With that, I'll put an end to this demo video. Until the next one, as always, take care, stay safe, and happy modeling.